Hi everyone. Now, one of the questions that a lot of you have been asking recently is how easy is it to convert a house into flats? Now, my guess is the reason why you want to do that is because you want to increase and maximize the cash flow on your investment. So obviously, if you're just renting one house, you're getting a rental income of, let's say, I don't know, £700 a month. Whereas if you convert a house into maybe 2-3 flats, you might get £600 times 3, which is £1,800 per month instead. So it makes sense that if you can convert a house into flats, why not go ahead and do it? But fundamentally, what you should do is bear in mind a number of important factors. So for example, location. Now, if you've got a property, say in an area where the demand for a 1-bed, 2-bed flat isn't very high, what's the point on converting a house into flats if you're going to struggle to obviously rent them out? The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is what your local authority development plan is for the area. So, for example, some planning authorities, they may not want or like you to convert properties into flats because it's against their policy. I know it sounds crazy when we've got a housing shortage, but trust me when I say some local authorities are very strict on the type of properties that you can convert into flats as opposed to other authorities. Now, one of the criteria, for example, is this. So let's say, for example, you've got a property that is in a populated area. Maybe the nearest train station is a mile away. Maybe there aren't many local bus stops nearby or whatever. Then the demand for flats may not be that high. Or maybe, for example, the local authority won't allow you to convert that property into flats because there isn't a lot or enough local amenities to enable multiple occupancy of a property to take place. So in other words, what they look at is parking facilities. So if a property doesn't have any off-street parking facilities, or by converting a property into flats means that maybe people have to rely more on vehicles to get to and from those flats, they may not give you planning permission in the first instance to convert the property into flats. Now trust me when I say, because I've experienced this on many occasions. I know it sounds crazy, but if, for example, there's a bus stop outside the property that you want to actually convert into a flat or into flats, then they might consider it, because you could turn around and argue, well, there's a bus stop outside, the people who are going to rent my flats may not have cars in any case, so they've got a means of using local amenities, public transport in order to travel. If there's a train station nearby, that all adds to your argument to be able to convert a house into flats. But off-street parking is very often an important factor, unless, of course, give you an example, you live in London. Now, there's not many facilities or properties maybe in central London that will enable people who want to live in a flat to have off-street parking. So policies in inner cities and so on will differ as opposed to those outside of cities. So again, that's a criteria you may have to look into, or even better, maybe get a planning consultant on board who can give you the necessary advice. Now, you may want to, for example, pop into your local planning department and speak to one of the planning officers. For me, that isn't always a good thing to do or a reliable thing to do, because trust me, again, I've seen different planning officers come up with different points of views and give some good advice, some bad advice, and so on and so on. Fundamentally, until you get an application in, or you've put a good case together as to whether or not you can convert a property into flats, you're not going to really know, which is why very often we hire a good planning consultant to give us advice beforehand and to do a lot of the research before we even consider buying or maybe submitting an application. So the other thing, of course, to bear in mind is feasibility. How much is this really going to cost? Now, to refurbish a house, let's say, for example, it's going to cost you £50,000 to refurbish a house to a good standard, whereas converting a house into numerous flats it's going to cost you a lot more. So the question is, why is it going to cost me a lot more? Well, the answer is quite simple. Building regulations for converting a property into flats vary dramatically compared to when you convert a property or refurbish a property. Let me just give you some good examples, okay? One is, if you're going to convert a house into flats, okay, on numerous levels, you're going to have to make sure that the acoustic sound insulation requirements between each property meet building regulations, because you're not allowed to obviously just convert a property into flats, whereas upstairs can hear everything that's going on downstairs and vice versa. So the acoustic qualities for each flat have to meet building regulation standards. The other thing to bear in mind is that each flat has to be protected and comply with fire regulations. So you have to increase the fire ratings between each property. Similarly, if, for example, you were building a row of terrace houses, okay? Now each party wall must obviously be fire protected to ensure that the spread of fire from one side, well, one property to another is maintained for a minimum 30 minutes, maybe even 60 minutes. And again, the same applies between each flat. Okay, so the ceilings, the floors, they all have to meet fire regulation approval. Not only that, depending again, okay, to what part of the country you're in, or even what part of the world you're even in, okay, it's highly likely you're going to have to install sprinkler systems, which aren't cheap. Now, a lot of people will say, well, that's fine, I can install sprinkler systems. But again, you know, you've got the complication, possibly got the complication, that a sprinkler system that might work off a standard water main will not work in the area of where you're buying the property, because sprinkler systems have to work on the basis of having A, good pressure, and B, a good flow rate. So if the sprinkler system that you need to install in your block of flats or whatever, or the property that you're converting into flats, hasn't got enough flow rate, it might mean that you have to install a water tank that has got the capacity to be able then to be pumped throughout the flats in order to maintain or put out a fire should one occur. Now, if you haven't got enough room within the flats to install a big water tank, you may have complications. So can you see where I'm coming from? There's a lot to think about. Now, the other thing to obviously consider as well is that when you're calculating your refurb costs to convert a house into flats is the fire escapes. Now, it's obvious, you know, that there'll be a main entrance through the front of the house, but these days regulations also mean that you've got to have fire escapes on the back of the properties as well. So if the house that you're converting hasn't got, for example, outside staircases, you know, whether they're metal or whatever, concrete, go into each floor, you may have to obviously install those and calculate the cost to install them as well. So it's not cheap. There are lots of things to consider. And then of course the final thing to really bear in mind is it cost effective? You have to do your figures, okay? I'm sure that you've seen in, you know, in other videos that we've done, and the advice that we've given before is that everything depends on the figures. So are you buying the property at the right price? Okay. B, is it likely that you're going to get planning permission to convert that property into flats? And thirdly, which is very, very, very important, you have to do your costings. So if, for example, you know, to refurbish that house, it would cost 50 grand, and then you'll be able to flip it and get a good return on your investment, or you're able to rent it, great. But bear in mind, if you're going to convert that property into flats, the refurb cost is probably going to end up costing you maybe 75 or even £100,000, twice as much, if not 3 times as much. So again, you have to bear in mind the figures and make sure that they work. So apart from that, there is, you know, it's relatively straightforward. It might sound a little bit overwhelming at the moment, but they're the key points that I would give you whenever you're looking to consider to turn a property into flat. So just to recap then for you quickly, the main things to consider are, you know, the location, feasibility, whether it means converting a house into flats would increase the parking facilities, whether off-site or on the street. My advice would be to maybe get some or appoint an independent planning consultant who would review your ideas more accurately than maybe just go into the local planning department, because they're not always accurate or give you the right advice. And then you'd have to submit the planning application. You may have to do a traffic management report to see how much traffic is along that street and whether or not converting a house into flats would increase the traffic, whether it would cause more parking issues and so on. There are other reports you may have to implement. And again, all of this costs money, and you have to get these reports together sometimes before you submit the planning application, because they have to go in with the planning application to support and hopefully ensure that you get the permission that you're looking for. But also, as I say, you're going to have to comply with different building regs for flats, as opposed to just renovating a house, because there are a lot more to think about: sprinkler systems, fire regs, fire escapes, acoustic sound, and all of this type of thing, party wall and so on, and obviously fire escapes. So you would have to get somebody on board to design that for you. A lot of builders, just word of warning, would not maybe know what criteria they have to comply with. So again, getting building reg drawings drawn up for you, I think, is a wise move, rather than just rely on a builder, because you won't want to spend a lot of money and for a building control inspector to come along and just fail the works that have been carried out. So all very important stuff. It might sound a little bit overwhelming. You might think, oh, bugger this, I'm not going to do it. Trust me, it's worth the hassle, particularly if you've got a good chance of doing it. But as they say, due diligence, doing your homework is the key, regardless of whether it's this project or any project. Now, if any of you have been on our property tours, or you're due to come on one of our property tours, you'll see exactly and hear exactly what we advise on what's involved in converting a house into flats. So again, that's another good way to learn and earn, as they say. Come along on one of those. But otherwise, yeah, by all means, give us, fire across some questions and so on. Be more than happy to help you. So until next time, ciao for now.